All right, let's do this. Are we ready?
Ready, let's do it.
Hey.
Awesome, awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Really excited to be in front of your screen today, whether it's in front of your laptop, desktop, or phone. I'm really excited to see you and to present to you today. We will be discussing leading with inclusive communications. And when you talk about leadership, there's so many elements to that. Whether you are in the HR space and you have to lead accordingly, or you are in the DEI space, or you're just an employer that has you manage or supervise. Leadership can involve so many elements, but one part of that element that we are going to really hone into today is communication styles. It's so relevant to your leadership style and really important to employee engagement and even colleague engagement. So I'm joined with my two colleagues and friends, and they will introduce themselves in just a moment, but I certainly want to go through our objectives today. So we orient ourselves there, and then we will do some brief intros and get things started. How's that? All right. So understanding inclusive leadership is, again, it has many nuances. So we're going to really look at an inclusive leadership model that we employ at Exude that weaves together both the employee experience and the customer experience. So you'll see how those two synergies really are in an experience, but it's based on a model that we have employed and put into place. We'll then go into learning how inclusive communication ties into both well-being of an individual as well as their team. Well-being is one of our core values and core components that we operate around, and Ms. Carla will definitely go into that a little bit more detail, but it's really important that we draw in that intersection of well-being. We'll finally go into addressing specific ways that leaders can learn to be more inclusive with their written and verbal communication. So we want you to walk away with some takeaways that you can have as best practices, as tips that you can actually start doing today, not tomorrow or next week, but you can actually start doing today. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I lead our DEI practice at Exude and really have been in this space for quite some time. I have a background in dispute resolution and its intersection with conflict resolution and DEI. So I am really excited about joining you today and learning and talking more about inclusive communications. I'll toss it to my teammates here now, Dan and Carla. Dan?
Yeah, so super nice to meet everybody. Thanks for your time today. My name is Dan Gallagher. I'm based out of Philly. Been with Exude working on the HR, DEI, and leadership development work that we do and how well-being strings through it all. We're really excited to share this with you today. And with that, I'll toss to Carla.
Good morning, folks. My name is Carla Chin, and I lead our well-being practice. I'm really excited to be invited to have this conversation with all of you. When it comes to well-being, sometimes folks will say, well, how is it connected to D&I initiatives? It's very much integrated, and that's really our intention today, is to be able to show you how it's all mutually reinforcing. Well-being and inclusive communication helps foster all the psychological safety, minimize microaggressions, and we're really going to dive deeper into that. So thank you for being with us this morning.
Awesome. So we wanted to start by leading with our core values and behaviors and drawing into the intersectionality. Carla and Dan both mentioned how well-being is one of our core values and behaviors that we string together in all of our practices as it relates to our human capital division. But we look at being self-aware, being inclusive, being well, and being accountable as a part of a centric behavior. So these are what you're going to see throughout this engagement, throughout all of our approaches as it relates to not only DEI, but HR, leadership development, these are really what we value and we operate under. And so as we move through our discussion today, we want to keep these at the center of the conversation and to really be mindful of these 4 areas as it relates even to your day-to-day professional lives in your interactions, because you can see how it can easily weave together to really form more of a holistic approach to understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really understanding better styles of inclusive communications. All right. So Dan, did you want to start off here, or would you like me to
let's go back one slide, if you will. I'm gonna throw a chat in.
Okay.
And I think Jay has shared a little bit about the intersectionality, but Carla and I were going to also jump in around some of the key elements of our approach to this work. For me, one of the things is we focus on meeting you individually and organizationally where you're at, right? Our goal is not to help create any moments of judgment, right? Really just to help create a plan to move forward, right? You get to define the pace that you want to move forward. You get to define the direction that you want to move forward. But if you anchor yourself in these 4 behaviors and you think about how the work, and we've got a lot of accountability popping, be well, good. Thank you for those responses. You can see how it will drive the culture and the momentum in the activity of the organization to help you hit your goals. Carl, let me toss to you and let you jump in, and then we'll move over to some thinking around inclusive leadership.
Certainly. The be well, when we think about being well, it's really looking at our folks as, people first, employees second, right? And when we're centered on that and grounded on that, decisions are going to be impacted, right? Our goals are going to be impacted. So I think that's really foundational in terms of how we approach our model and in terms of how we integrate the well-being part.
Yeah. So Jay talked a lot about intersectionality in her intro, and we're going to play to that right now. So when you think about intersectionality, you could talk about inclusivity and DEI in one bucket, and you can talk about communications or leadership in another bucket. And at Exude, we really focus on bringing them all together to what Carla was just sharing of focusing on the person first and how they can show up as a teammate second, as an employee. We talk about this in terms of there's vertical work and there's horizontal work, right? So the vertical work in DEI would be, for example, that most organizations have a statement or have a policy or have a core training or have a value, right? That is the element that kind of drives the center of the universe, the compass moment, if you will. When you look at the horizontal, it's how does that play out in your new hire experience or your candidate experience or your year-end review or your sales process or the way that a product is developed for a customer or the way that you serve your community. And so organizations need to focus on both, but one of the things you'll see us talk a little bit about here is how do we think about both the vertical and the horizontal, because the horizontal is what takes the vertical and embeds it in the organization and connects it to the work, the business as usual work. So it's differentiating what is in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I know we have friends of Exude on here that are part of 10-person organizations and 10,000-person organizations. And so it's different for each group, and we'll speak to that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to explain a little bit about our inclusive leadership model. And so when you think about this, it's going to center around a bike. And the idea behind the bike is that at its core, every organization is in place to create some sort of an experience for whether it's customers, constituents, or clients, right? And some sort of experience for employees, right? And the bike, the frame of the bike is what brings those two experiences together. What we like to focus on within Exude is that the leader sits on the seat and holds two hands at 10 and 2, I guess, on the direction in terms of the handlebars. And it's interesting because the leader is presenting the power in the bicycle by pedaling, right? And that pedaling actually propels the employee experience directly, but then that also moves the customer experience. And in the center of the frame are all the practices, culture, and processes that bring this together. Now, obviously, in some organizations, you're going to have different sets of customers. So your bicycle might become a tricycle that's looking like it's going in reverse or things along that line. But the general concept here is the connectivity between EX, the employee experience, CX, the customer experience or client or constituent or community experience that you have, and then how leadership helps create that bridge between that with the frame that they create. So let me toss back to you, Jay, around this, because I know you're going to talk a little bit about actions and beliefs. And while Jay is doing that, what you're going to see is Carla add another chat. One of the things that we're going to do is encourage you to share some of the things that you're following or reading or listening to right now. So you'll see another chat come up. It's actually up there. So thank you, Carla. Jay, back to you.
Yeah, so what Dan really broke down is a model that we also like to say that this work as it relates to DEI is it's really humanizing, right? So even though as we're on this journey in this bicycle, there is a person that is on top of this bike that's leading. That humanizes this, that makes it more of not just metrics, not just something that is looking at it from a viewpoint of, oh, this is just an initiative, but this is really about the culture. And so when you're looking at the results of this person that's on this bike, this leader that's on this bike, the perceptions are really dictated and reflect the actions of that leader, the actions, the beliefs. And so when you're in this position of leadership, it's really catapulting both the employee experience as well as the customer experience. As you see that the wheels will start to go in the direction of where the leader is leading. And so the perceptions that the leader has, is their beliefs, it's really going to be reflective of all. And so we like to say that this really humanizes the experience, the approach, and it really brings into more of a visual understanding of the importance that we have as leaders to really dictate the culture and dictate both the experience and for the employees and constituent base.
Yeah, we've seen more and more organizations and individual leaders try to really embrace this connectivity. Because the optics of how someone shows up as an inclusive leader and or an inclusive communicator influence, for example, is there enough air in the tire of the employee experience, right? And how much effort does it take them, therefore, to move that? And some of that is built out by one-on-one conversations. Some of it is built out by organizational decisions. Some of that is built out by prioritization of efforts. And all of those things are from a leadership perspective are visible, and the ripple effect of things happening or not happening. Every action, even no action, is an action, right? And so that failure to address also counts here, or counts as not counting. And so when we think about showing up and as being a more inclusive leader, all these facets play in. And you can see, I saw one of the comments in the book that was being shared, I think it was an Adam Grant book, was while it's not a DEI book, right? And the reality is that's our point, is that everything really has the opportunity to be looked at as an inclusive resource, right? As an inclusive decision. And so it's really valuable to see more and more people thinking about it that way, because it just becomes a natural part of how we think about things, how we talk about things, how we decide things. And as an HR community, which is most of who we are in this call, we have an opportunity to both influence the organization and protect the organization, as well as influence the employee experience through how we interact and how we set policy or culture. You think about, gosh, all the different facets of whether you're doing new hire training or recruiting or year-end reviews, and we'll talk a little about these examples, how those things influence what does the bike look like, right? PTO policies and inclusive benefits, right? Like there's so many different ways to think about this. So it's really, it really starts to to snowball to celebrate those in the snow belt of December this time of the year. I think we're good on this, Jay. And oh, by the way, if you have questions along the way, you're welcome to submit them in the chat. There's an option to go to everyone with your chat. There's also an option to submit questions. You can do that to everyone, or you can just submit it to the panelists, and Carla, Jay, and myself are monitoring that along the way.
Yes. So, you know, when we're thinking, and when I mentioned previously, humanizing this thing, it really, to Dan's point, plays into this not just being a DEI thing, this really being about the totality and a holistic approach of really understanding and leading an organization inclusively. And one part of that, a huge part, I'd say an integral part, is the safety and well-being. We use the term quite frequently in the DEI space, but psychological safety is a critical aspect of really being a vessel. I like to say that it's a vessel to creating a space of inclusion and feeling and sentiment of belonging. So when we look at psychological safety, and Carla's gonna talk more about that, but there are four components, four elements that really talk more to what it is to be in a psychologically safe environment, or to have psychological safety. And Carla, did you want me to go through these, or did you want to hop in right now?
No, I think that it'd be a good time to just go through it, and I
Okay. Awesome. So when we think about inclusion safety, safety to feel included, you know, it's our basic human desire to just want to be included. If you can recall back, it may take a little bit more recollection for some than others, but think back to kindergarten, when you wanted to just, when you had the first day of school and you just wanted to feel like, you know, I feel included. You really didn't want to stand out too much, but you really wanted to just be in an environment where you feel included. And that is really our basic human desire, is to want to feel included. So having that safety to feel included, to feel as though I can be myself, even that phrase, my authentic self, that is a part of having inclusion safety. That safety to learn is really what we're doing here. It's having the ability to feel safe in an environment where there's a learning environment. Maybe you have a question that you want to ask that may not be politically correct. And we do know that in this space, it is really, it's really apparent and common to feel just a fear for, am I going to say the right thing? And am I going to be reprimanded by using the wrong term? But really having a safety, a feeling of safety to learn in an environment is a part of psychological safety too. Safety to contribute is one that, you know, as professionals, it really is about feeling as though you can have a say or have a seat at the table to contribute to thought processes. It's been proven and empirically studied that culturally diverse organizations really have better decision making, and it's really because people have the ability and to feel as though they can contribute. They can contribute with their new innovative ideas, and it really plays into improving overall your business decision. So that safety to feel like you can contribute to ideas, that you are valued, that is a part of psychological safety as well. And finally, but certainly not least, is safety to challenge. And I don't want to rush through this one at all, because safety to challenge the status quo, it is definitely one that takes courage. It takes courage, but you know what? What fosters that courage is in an environment where you feel like you can, where it won't be retaliation just because I'm challenging you to think broader, or I'm challenging you to think in a way that may not be what's current at the moment. So that these four parts, I like to call them elements, really are all a part of being in a psychological safe space. And when you have that psychological safety, you then have, again, as I stated before, that vessel to be more of an inclusive culture, an inclusive organization, and people really feel like they can belong and they feel that belongingness when they have that psychological safety. So I'm going to toss it to Carla now to talk about more about how well-being is a part of this.
Thank you, Jaya.
Sure.
And I love that sort of setup in context, because it's so helpful when we're talking about this from a well-being lens. But just in the last year, mental health has been the #1 topic of my conversations with our clients, with any human. In the 7 years I've been at Exude, it has not been this busy when it comes to just having meetings around this and helping clients develop stigma reduction strategies around mental health. And so when we're talking about inclusive communication, this hits the mark, right? This is an opportunity to really take care of your folks, right? I've also heard often I've been challenged as far as the myths, that's so PC, this is people are too sensitive. I think that there's understandable, right? Maybe folks just have not been in the receiving end of what non-inclusive communication can feel like. But if we could step back and look at it from a lens of this is about relationships, right? This is about valuing the person. And so to make the effort, to have the courage to challenge ourselves and our norms and our habits and what we've learned, and unlearn that, allows our colleagues, our community members, even beyond a workplace, to feel respected, to feel seen, and that they matter. Right? And ultimately, that is the core of our well-being philosophy and approach at Exude. It's not about all the fancy programs. It's, does this align with helping your employees feel like they matter, they're seen, and that they're respected and valued, right? It is core human needs. And so when we think about the power of language and words, what we believe shapes how we think. Right? There's a quote. It says, "Words create worlds." Right? Words create worlds. And I just want to pause there and let you digest that for a moment, because it's in the essence of that. I mean, we think about everything we know, the stories we've shared, the stories we've heard, right? It shapes our belief systems. And so what we think shapes how we speak and how we act as well. And so it's about challenging some of that, because we value relationships. So if we look at it through a lens of that human lens, I'm putting the effort to learn some of these new skills, a new approach of how to communicate, so that I can value this person, because our relationship matters. And, when we prioritize that, not only the relationship, ends up, becoming flourishing and really helps in the dynamic, but the performance of that individual, your ability to be loyal and committed, to go over and above, to have your back, to be partners, right, and collaborate. It's pretty amazing, right, as far as the ripple effect. And words also mold our way of thinking about others, right, or how we think about others, things that we've adopted. So this is an opportune time to really step back and reflect, what are some of the ideals, the norms, the beliefs that we've adopted around this topic that maybe, is now the time to perhaps challenge or, sort of really reflect, do gut check and say, can I do better? And so when it comes to psychological safety, Jay did such a great job in just, framing this. I think that we could probably keep going with it, but at the end of the day, well-being, and at least what I've been seeing in my work, mental health challenges are pre-pandemic, 1 in 5 individuals are struggling with mental health challenge. Post-pandemic, the data is closer to 1 in 2, right? And so that tells you that 50%, every other person that you're connected with, may be struggling with a mental health challenge. And 2 of the most common mental health disorders are anxiety and depression. And so you may have even heard folks say, I'm feeling really anxious right now. And we've just normalized that as if it's just part of day-to-day work and stress. Now, when we're in stress mode and we're feeling anxious and we're not feeling well, it also limits how we see our world and how we connect with other people. So as leaders, this is an opportunity to be really mindful of how we connect and communicate, because there's a term that says if you're dealing with any human, you're dealing with their traumas. All right. And so when we're honoring that, then I think it shifts the way that we perhaps can approach things and our communications, and again, going back to that human-centric approach.
Right.
Anything to add, Jay and Ben?
Yeah, I'd love to add in just one point, and I think it's, and I mean to say this in a healthy, supportive way. I think the chat right now is a metaphor for kind of where society is at, right? So when you ask a very linear question around what books are you reading or podcasts you're listening to, the cup floweth over, if you will. Exactly right, Carrie. The last question is harder. But back to Carla's point that words matter. Think about the last time you've been in a meeting where you were talking about safety and it didn't have to do with OSHA, right? Like that is changing the game for how we can influence both the employee experience, the company culture, right? Even the customer experience has an impact on that. So it is absolutely harder. And to Carla's point, it's taking those human moments to just reflect and pause and think about it and saying, okay, when I think about, and we'll focus on some examples later in the session, but when I think about the email that announces the year-end performance appraisals, or when I think about the first 10 minutes of new hire orientation, or when I think about what words are happening there, and is there the intentional focus to have them matter?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
One other thing that came to mind, I didn't get to add, language also matters, because not only is it for the recipient of your communication, but it's also for those who may be witnessing it, right? And so we don't realize that it actually has, again, this ripple effect, this contagion that ends up happening and can lead to toleration as well, right? And so this is where, again, we definitely need to have the courage to challenge this. Awesome. So as far as a couple of ways to look at inclusive communication, some considerations on the screen here, you'll see many, what is it, what did we call this, Dan?
Hollywood Squares.
The Hollywood Squares. If you're curious about one area specifically, I can certainly dive into it. I'll touch on a couple of these for considerations for inclusive communication. The first one being in my wheelhouse here, ableism, disability, and neurodiversity. It's, if you haven't heard of the term neurodiversity, this is about the differences in our human brain relating to learning, attention, mood, and sociability. So I just shared with you the data earlier. 1 in 2 individuals are in the US are struggling with a mental health disorder or mental health challenge. So that tells us that this is a really important area to consider as far as how we speak about individuals and their experiences. So just a really practical way of applying this, rather than sharing that or referring to someone as, oh, they're depressed or they're bipolar, right? It's the person living with X, Y, and Z, right? So you definitely want to use person first language when it comes to inclusive communication, because we are more than our diagnosis, we're more than our conditions, right? And so what it says is that this is just a part of this individual, and we're honoring the fact that there's so much more dimension to this person. Let's see, but I think I touched that one. Michelle,
I'll give a shout out, Carla. Can you tackle? I'll take pronunciation of names for $300, please.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, as far as pronunciation of names, so taking time to spell and pronounce names correctly. That's really important. If you're unsure, which I've been in situations where I've been unsure, ask, right? Ask. I think that shows that you care enough to ask, right? And confirm if you've said it correctly. And so that, I don't know if anyone, raise your hand or type in the chat if you've been in a situation where, someone mispronounced your name and either it wasn't appropriately handled and it was offensive, or maybe they took this webinar and learned how to appropriately address that. So I'm curious if anyone's had a lived experience of that one.
Definitely
no.
me, Carla. I'll say that. I'll hop in there. My name it's caused some pause when I was growing up, and you had a substitute teacher, and they came to call attendance, and if there was pause, I knew that they were trying to figure out how to pronounce my name. But now, as I get older, I really appreciate when people just take the time and say, you know, how do you pronounce your name? It's so common that you know, people may feel uncomfortable with trying to take a stab at it first. So like you said, Carla, just pausing and to say, hey, how do you pronounce your name? It really shows to me that you care how I'd like to be identified. So I think that's a really good one to call out.
Yeah, and I think coming from a point of privilege, whether it's because my first name is Dan or whether I'm a white male, to not ask Jaya is dismissive, is exclusive.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's recognizing and it's coaching our cultures to celebrate the differences and to pause and ask, and not just saying, oh, it's super nice to meet you, and just gloss over it, because that's felt by Jaya.
Absolutely. I love that call out, Dan. And you know, it also, when you ask someone, well, can I call you this instead? You know, it just really, it dismisses a lot of the history behind your name. A name is everything, and I come from a culture that means that. So that's definitely a good call out, Dan.
And going back to feeling seen, right? I mean, there's nothing that makes you feel more seen than someone taking the time to actually ask your preference, right? And how you'd like to be. Your name is so personal to us, right? It's so much of our identity. Michelle, just your question regarding neurodiversity. So this refers to the differences in our human brain functioning. So it could be related to how we learn, our attention, mood, sociability, you know, relating to also mental health disorders. And just going back to the person first language, you know, applying that in that way rather than calling people based on or labeling people based on their conditions. It's really folks are living with these conditions, and frankly, many are high functioning, right? And that's the challenge, especially with neurodiversity and mental health. On the Zoom, even in person, someone could look completely on point, right? And polished, and we do not know. It's easy to disguise. And because of the stigma around mental health, it is often feels like we need to disguise it because there's so much shame and fear around what happens if I'm outed. How is my job secure? Am I still going to be valued? Am I going to still appear as if I am a contributor to my team, right? So just being mindful, and also just making sure when you are in meetings, you know, just there's adjectives that are often thrown in. I really am trying so hard to work on this because I still find myself using the term crazy and it just slips out of my mouth, but just being mindful of like when we're referring to our experiences, oh, I'm feeling so OCD right now. Oh my gosh, I just had a bipolar moment, right? Like these are terms that are often loosely thrown, and they've been part of norms, right, in the past. And so this is where we need to halt and say, okay, Carla mentioned 1 in 2 folks are dealing with mental health disorder, which means there's a high likelihood that someone in this meeting may feel shamed about this, or they may be caregiving or have someone really close to them, which is likely, that are also having a lived experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been working with one client, and he's a really fascinating person, and part of what the way he wraps himself around it is he just says, like, the way that we work needs more compassion. We're so focused on Taskmaster and month over month kind of hitting, you know, okay, last year we got 10 and this year we're going to get 12 and next year we're going to get 14. And that compassion and empathy and humanizing, as Jay mentioned earlier, becomes so important. Why don't we pivot? I think we have a couple of written and verbal communication.
Yes, so a couple more practical examples. You know, as our awareness continues to expand, I mean, there are terms that were used in the past that were tolerated, but now we know are recognized as offensive, exclusive, disrespectful, or even privileged. So here's just a slide. We won't go through line by line, but you know, I'd invite you to just look at this and see if anything specific sort of stands out for you. One perhaps that you find yourself using on a regular basis or even recently. I think this is just an opportunity, again, to step back, gut check. We won't judge you. You don't have to type which one you've used recently. Right. So again, this is like, and we've all used in some form, right? Something similar to this. We've all made mistakes. And that is actually the takeaway ultimately of this session, is that we're human. And so we're not expecting you to go back to your workplaces or your next meeting and never slip up. The courage has come up a lot in this session, and the courage is also having the courage to pivot and own your mistakes and own up to it and learn from it ultimately. So here again are some examples. Dan and Jay, I don't know if you want to dive deeper into any of these specifically. I think these are really great suggestions.
And I also want to kind of call out, Sophia said, would historically oppressed be more accurate? I wouldn't say more accurate, more or less accurate. I think you can use either or. It's going to depend on, and I want to make this caveat, even in trying for the best or more inclusive way of communication, you still may hit a nerve. You still may offend. And so sometimes the word oppress coming from a person that is perceived to be an oppressor is really offensive to some. So it really depends, Sophia, but I certainly can see both used interchangeably, and depending on the audience, you can certainly use either or, historically underrepresented or historically oppressed.
Yeah, and Jay put a chat question out there about 2 chats ago that really starts to address this. And I think one of the best ways to stay informed, because this is literally changing week by week here in terms of what new terms are happening. So whether it was the question before around neurodiversity, and I think, Denise, you make a great point in your response there of it's important to give, we at Exude love to use the phrase, and Jay, I think you coined it here, is space for grace, right? And in order for us to create scenarios, and it goes back to the safety, right? In order for us to create scenarios where someone can mispronounce a name and ask for that space or grace, there has to be safety in the culture. And so it all does connect to each other. And you can see then how, going back to the bike, that these are elements of what keep the bike strong. To some degree, they could be spokes in the employee life cycle, in the employee experience, wheel. And so it really does weave together, because if I can't show up feeling good and well about myself, right, then how am I going to be great at what I'm assigned to do? How am I going to feel comfortable, back to the psychological safety slide, pushing back in a moment where somebody thinks it's blue, somebody thinks it's red, and I'm sitting there saying, let's make it purple. And so these are all the things that influence someone's ability to show up and be great.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we were going to do now was really get into connecting this deeper to the employee experience. We've used, and we'll show a slide on the employee life cycle. We've used the example of year-end performance reviews and how did safety show up. We've been working with a couple of different clients on this. The way that we're thinking about it, especially in the role of HR, is that there's preventions and then there's interventions. And the preventions are what you do to set the tone, and the interventions are how you respond potentially when it's really on tone and you appreciate it, or when it's really off tone and you have to course correct. So we thought it'd be valuable to take a couple of examples on ways that you can play that out. Let's start first with year-end performance reviews, because we already started talking about that. We were on a call actually yesterday with a client, Jay and I, and they were talking about how when they were getting ready to do their calibration meetings, to have meetings with leaders before, once they had built the ratings, but before they had communicated and had the conversations, the HR leader had actually shared in preparation for that meeting that they were going to ask them to look at the data and see how the ratings and the merit increases played out across race, gender, tenure, et cetera. Another HR leader actually chimed in and said, you know what, I love that. And I've actually stopped showing last year's rating because that automatically creates a bias on if they were great last year, they're probably great this year. And so there were things like that that this leadership team was doing around creating a stronger baseline for preventions so that there was less need for the interventions. In some cases, you still put those preventions in place. And that HR leader was saying, I still had to go into a leader that didn't really care for it. And Jay and I were actually role playing of like, okay, well, I just need to run the business, and that's what the business called for. And that's why all of this group received the higher merit increases or all the higher ratings, and that group didn't. You know, and those discussions are tough and they're courageous, and they're needed. Another one of my favorite stories to tell about this is around, I know of a colleague in the industry that does this kind of work. And he shares this story where he was able to influence a legal team around changing the language in mandatory training. If you think about it, in any organization, there's certain communications that hit every single employee. And generally your mandatory training is one of those things. His influence was to be more inclusive with pronouns around how those 15, 20, 30-minute e-learnings were built out. Completely changed the game, right? Because I think a first step was there were photos, but a second step, when people heard it in the voiceover, they could, you know, Carla pointed this out before, they could see themselves, they could hear themselves. And then the last one would be really around recruiting. And you think about this right now, it is so competitive out there right now for talent. And we bring in this outside teammate who's going to help us, you know, come up with new ideas. And back to the psychological safety, you know, how well do we create an opportunity for them to be the newest person? One of the things I get really interested about is, you know, so many times we'll introduce ourselves with, I've been with the organization for X years or Y months. And that either influences a group around our credibility or how much influence we have or things along that line. And really, we're hiring new teammates from outside the organization. Again, one of JS favorite phrases, you're not to be a culture fit, to be a culture add, to bring new ideas. And so when you think about how things are addressed in an offer letter, when you think about what's the spirit behind new hire, that first hour of new hire, right? If an individual that's responsible for delivering new hire, back to the table that Carla had shared before, if they kick off new hire experience and say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, right? There may be someone in that group that doesn't consider themselves as a lady or a gentleman, right? It is a common phrase that people use but there's a lot of history in that. And so it's helping people to recognize that when, back to Carla's point, words matter, when you can be more intentional with how you choose to use words, it does have a huge influence around how people can feel their sense of belonging. Let me pause there, and Jay or Carla.
Yeah, no, Dan, I think you really hit the nail on the head, and I definitely am going to go to the chat because I think we have some good questions going there. But, you know, in terms of recruiting, it's been really part of trend right now for organizations to really struggle with saying that they want to hire more diverse talent, or, you know, how can we expand our pool, our net, to capture that diversity. And I think, you know, there are so many elements to that. But one of them, and this is to a point that you made, Dan, it's in your messaging too. It's how you're coming across in your external messaging. That actually starts recruiting and attracting that diverse talent, because diversity in its all various spectrums of identity, you will, if I see and I identify myself as a member of the LGBTQ community, and I see in your on your website that you support, or that you have something that really acknowledges something that represents me, if that is me, then that's going to make me feel as though I'm welcome to even apply. I think I want to go to that company. For me, I'll even use Exude. When I was fortunate enough to be in the stage where I was looking for employment, I was really strategic on where I wanted to be. And for me, it meant, what are you representing on your website? What are you, I hear what your hiring manager is saying, but what is it? Is it reflective of your external messaging? Right now, that's all that I can see. I can't interview any internal persons, but what that says, how your job descriptions are worded, all of that really matters, and it really plays into your communication style. Your messaging is very important. I really want to pivot to okay, perfect. I love it, Carla. You're on it. I think Carrie had a question about pronouns. Did we want to pause here? Or Carrie, did Carla get everything covered there? Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, cool beans. All right, so let's keep it moving. Here we are. So some best practices that we just really want to kind of zone into, and I think Carla is going to get into this a little bit more into detail, but some best practices of how to be an inclusive communicator, no matter what your role is, what your functionality is within your organization. Are these, Carla, you want to take these?
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just bringing it all, to close here. I mean, there's a lot that we shared today. Ultimately, when we think about that person-centered approach, the human, when just kind of, if everyone can just take a moment and even just step back and think about someone in your life that you value that relationship so greatly and dearly, and the impact that, how you communicate with that person, like if it's a best friend, if it's a colleague that you really value that relationship with, we typically will, go over and above in terms of making sure that we're caring for them, that we're checking in on them, that we're collaborating in an harmonious way. And so if we even take that same approach and use that with all humans, right, and how that could really change our communication. So it's less about thinking and being afraid of what we're going to say, but rather coming from a place of like, I'm honoring the human in you, and I know that this relationship's really important to me, and that you're important enough for me to take the time to actually make sure that I'm meeting you where you are and what you need, right? And so again, ultimately, if you don't know, just ask is sort of our great takeaway today, because we're all learning here. We're talking about this with you. We're sharing this. We look like the experts. We're learning every day. We mess up every day, right? And so please don't be afraid. I think that's a great way, the segue to get into the next slide.
Yes.
Let me jump in with one quick point. I think the other piece behind this, and hopefully you take this away from how Carla, Jay, and I play off each other, is to crowdsource this, right? Mm-hmm. This doesn't have to be one magnificent moment by one magnificent person, right? Commitment is about saying to the people you work with, I feel like this is important. I'm going to put my energy behind this, and I need your help. Mm-hmm. That gives people permission. That creates safety, right? For people to jump in and sit there and say, great, I really could help you on this. And so I think as you go into a new year, it's always an opportunity to pause and pivot, right? After you've had a chance to reflect. I think, that this is a great moment where you can sit there and ask people for help and not feel like you have to do it all yourself, but you can help facilitate.
Absolutely. And, one thing that I like to kind of highlight is being aware of your own of your own biases, of your own blind spots. That self-reflection is so necessary. We say be self-aware, but that looks like a lot of things. That doesn't just mean, being aware of your own triggers, but it means kind of examining why, what are those triggers coming from? Why do I tend to refer to a type of person like this? Would that make me feel? Things like this. It really takes a moment of self-reflection, self-awareness, and you have to check your own before kind of going out to their neighbors and sweeping their lawn, right? So that's just like my grandmother's old phrase that she used to say, sweep in front of your own porch before you go to others. And I think that that's such a relevant thing, even in our society and in our professional lives, as we continue to want to grow, to be a better colleague, to be a better leader, being self-aware, being really proactive in our own issues and in our own biases, really it's like a domino effect. When we recognize those, our own, then others start to do the same, and really the community, the entire organization start to have a change, a transformative change. So we wanted to end and leave you with this quote by Elbert Hubbard. And it says, the greatest mistake you can make in life is continually fearing that you will make one. It's almost like saying, you don't even take that leap of faith to that next great opportunity that may just completely be the best thing that ever happened to you because you're too afraid to take it. And you miss out on that opportunity. And so when we talk about being inclusive communicators, especially in leadership, the worst thing that you can do is to just simply not do anything at all, not really try to be more inclusive, to really try to evolve as a leader, as a business professional, to just say, I have it all figured out and there's nothing more for me to learn. I love that Carla said we're still stewards. And even though we're recognized in the fields, in our respective fields as subject matter experts, we're still stewards. And this is a learning process continually for us. It's still a journey. And that's the beauty in it. And I think if you keep that mindset, as I'm still learning, I'm always learning, you're still a sponge, and it really offers a space of humility, and that in itself really fosters inclusion. People feel like, I can relate to that person. So I'll close with that. And any of my colleagues want to say anything before we conclude, or we have a couple of minutes if we want to take a few questions.
Just wanted to make a quick announcement on the next slide, Jaya.
Sure.
We're excited if this was interesting to you and we want to dive deeper into D&I or any of the other tracks that we have up on the screen, we're launching a 4-month virtual learning experience for leaders, managers, supervisors, or even emerging leaders. And so these are the 3 different tracks that we were able to offer, and you're going to get more information as a follow-up about this, but certainly feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm leading the experience along with our facilitators, two of whom are on our screen here, so it's going to be great, folks. It's one of our core values at Exude, but you'll see on the D&I development track, there's actually a course on inclusive communication, which will go even deeper into this topic. And if you like this, like I said, there's going to be more covered there. Okay, so again, more to come on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carla. It's been a pleasure really interacting with you all. I want to just take some moments and see if there's anything in the chat that we overlooked. And really encourage you to outreach any of us. If you, we can be found, and our emails are on the website, but certainly feel free to outreach us if you have any questions or you would like to connect.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the day, and thanks for all the energy in the chat.
Take care.